Good afternoon, and welcome as we continue our conversation about Babi Yar and the memory of the massacre that occurred there on September 29th and 30th in 1941. My name is Erin Blankenship, and I have the great privilege of being the interim executive director of the Florida Holocaust Museum and for providing today's introductions. Today's presentation is somewhat of a continuance of last night's panel discussion on the memory of Babi Yar and the Shostakovich Symphony, and that we'll be learning more about the efforts in Kyiv, Ukraine, to memorialize the almost 34,000 victims who were murdered there. If you didn't have the opportunity to tune into that panel discussion, you can find it right here on the museum's page, and I hope you'll take the opportunity to do so. This presentation, entitled Landscape and Landmarks of Babi Yar as a Testament of Public Memory, comes to us from Dr. Sergiy Borysov. Dr. Borysov is an assistant professor at St. Leo University and a native of Ukraine. This presentation comes from his great interest in the history of his country, and he seeks to understand it as his own family's past is intertwined with the history as a grandchild of a Holocaust victim and of a prisoner of war. We're incredibly grateful to Dr. Borysov for creating this presentation, and so without further ado, we welcome Dr. Sergiy Borysov. Thanks so much.
My name is Sergiy Borysov. I'm native of Kyiv, native of Ukraine. I spent a lot of my own time exploring the issues around Babi Yar, and I would like to talk to you a little bit about this probably one of the most horrible and the darkest pages in the history of Ukraine. In just the matter of 2 days, 80 years ago, September 29, 30s, 1941, during German occupation of Kyiv, Nazis orchestrated and executed killing of almost 34,000 of people, of Jewish population of my hometown. It's indeed hard to comprehend and understand the scope of this atrocity. While their fathers and their brothers and their husbands were drafted to the war in the middle of already devastated and destroyed city by the war and Stalin's regime and starvation, thousands and thousands of women with children and somebody's elder mothers and sick grandparents were deceived and trapped and humiliated and executed in the suburbs of the city in the area known as Babi Yar. And this, as tragic as it is, but this event of Holocaust is largely unknown to the general world, and even within Ukraine itself, it's just being recognized at a substantial enough level. So I'm very deeply thankful to the Florida Holocaust Museum for bringing public's attention for this act of cruelty. And I'm very glad I am a little part of that endeavor also. Specifically, what I would like to do, I would like to overview with you what is Babi Yar and what happens to it, and what kind of changes it went through since the time of that massacre and up to our days. And probably the main message that I would like to deliver in this communication is basically how long and how painful it was us waiting basically for proper recognition for the site. So what is Babi Yar? Well, first of all, it's a large natural ravine on the suburbs of Kyiv then, but now this area pretty much is in the middle of the city. It is the product of natural erosion, which occurs a lot in Kyiv as it is located on a high hill and a lot of cities located downhill. So there is a lot of opportunities for formation of these to occur. And from this model of Babi Yar, you can see that it has a really branched out and network-like structure with a lot of gullies and valleys blended into one big. However, for the when we talk about Babi Yar as a site of Jewish genocide, we're really focusing on this particular gully, and we know about its placement due to a specific shape of the heel across. So this heel across, it has this double-edged, really serves as a landmark on all historical pictures to really identify the site, because as you're gonna see, it's been changed to no recognition. So here's the old picture of the Babi Yar before the war, and this is pretty much how it looked during the time of execution. So just to be geologically precise, this is that double H hill across, and this is the ravine itself. So we can see that it's very deep, it's very large, very steep hills, no vegetation. And again, this is one of those rare images that we have in our possession that actually give us a visual understanding what it was like. Once again, this was the site of mass execution of Jewish people in Kyiv 8 years ago. The site never remained the same, and this is how it looked just a couple of days after. And the remarkable difference here is the depth of the ravine. So with horror, I would say this is packed with human bodies, and these prisoners of war basically covering it with soil. And again, the location, you can see the double-edged hill across, and that's how the site becomes recognizable. And this is a picture taken by a German soldier that became a signature picture of Babi Yar for now. This mass grave never been preserved, and it went through some catastrophic changes, are there to say. And the first change happened just 2 years after the massacre. So when Soviet army was approaching Kyiv, and there was a danger that Soviet Union will claim city back, Germans decided to eliminate the evidence for this humongous crime. So 2 years after Babi Yar genocide event took place, the bodies were excavated by prisoners of war, burned and destroyed. So this is a picture of Babi Yar taken after the war by Soviets. And once again, you kind of maybe can see here that a side of the double-edged hill, but the main point in this photo, that the depth of Babi Yar is kind of restored because it's empty now. In this shape, Babi Yar existed for quite a few years. Nothing of significance was done on the site to commemorate or acknowledge the human loss. Most likely the site was pretty much neglected until Soviet Union government decided basically eradicate Babi Yar from the landscape of Kyiv and pretty much from the storytelling. And that was done in the following way. So a large dump was erected that isolated that portion of Babi Yar from the subsequent downstream its gullies. And so this is basically a big dirt-based, soil-based bulwark, and which is kind of, again, the Babi Yar is going to be behind it on the other side. You can see the beginning of the double-edged hill. And once again, the Babi Yar on the other side. And the Babi Yar was filled with pulp, with waste materials from nearby brick factories, basically semi-liquid cement, with an intention to convert it into solid grounds for residential developments. This pretty much atrocity lasted quite a few years, and eventually it led for another big catastrophe in Kyiv, a giant mudslide. So the dam could not hold the amount of liquid cement and pulp, and on top of that, it was a springtime with melted snow. It broke through with a giant wave of mud that smashed areas underneath, which were primarily residential and industrial areas, and instantly perished over 1,500 people. So that tragedy was known, but very well hidden in the Soviet Union times. But that did not change the fate of Babi Yar. The mud was cleaned up and put back into the ravine, and its flattening continued for many years after. Despite really purposeful attempts of the Soviet Union government to eliminate Babi Yar as a part of Kyiv's landscape, and of course as a part of a Jewish tragedy and human loss, there was some outspoken and very vivid attempts to bring public attention to this issue of no recognition of Babi Yar. And most notably, it was done by Evgeny Yevtushenko in his poem, and Dmitry Shostakovich, his symphony number 13, and very importantly by Anatoly Kuznetsov, who was a little boy living in the vicinity of Babi Yar during the Nazis' occupation. And he observed all the atrocities and disasters that were happening in Kyiv during the time, and he wrote a historical novel that actually was a groundbreaking voice in the need to pay attention to Babi Yar. And eventually, some recognition came, and during Soviet Union time in 1976, pretty much some 35 years after, a monument was erected. And the monument, as you can see here, was really, I would say, a continuation of Soviet Union propaganda about the World War II, with glorifying kind of communist soldier-based leaders in fighting the Nazis, and the role or the civilian pain was downplayed, and definitely Jewish component in the tragedy was completely removed, and it was silenced. The placement of that monument also was not very accurate. It was in the vicinity of Babi Yar, but really far away from the place of genocide. Yet, I would like to say that the artistically does depict ideas of humiliation and throwing bodies into the deep gulch of a ravine. So with all of those limitations, that was the only monument that was in the site of Babi Yar for many, many, many years. The topic was a taboo, and people just know about Babi Yar as much as they could hear from a neighbor, basically. The situation really changed during by Ukraine gaining independence in 1991 and the collapse of Soviet Union. So basically, within a month of Ukraine gaining independence, a menorah was erected in the site of Babi Yar in the areas of those double-edged hills we looked before. So it was a more a proper location, and it was acknowledging the Holocaust tragedy by placing menorah there. It was obviously much closer to the actual site of execution. Later on, a modest symbolic rock was placed within Babi Yar within the site of potential of the execution, with the promise to build more of a significant Holocaust memorial. However, nothing gonna happen for next 20 years in terms of acknowledging Jewish tragedy of Babi Yar. Instead, we're gonna see something different. We're gonna see how the area gets populated with a number of other monuments. And this is an important thing to acknowledge here, that Babi Yar eventually, all in parallel, during Nazi occupation, was a site not only where Jewish people were killed, a number of other layers of Kyiv society were executed there as well. So as Soviet Union fell apart and people started to overlook their history and acknowledge and put its right points in the right places, the site started to get populated with a number of monuments, which I'm gonna mention probably the most significant among them. So there is a monument for killed children. There is a monument that acknowledges mental hospital patients being killed by Nazis, Romani people that were executed there as well based on their nationality and ethnicity, prisoners of war memorial, a monument to Anatoly Kuznetsov, again the writer, the guy who wrote the historical novel, which basically really brought attention to the issues of Babi Yar. Ukrainian activist Olena Teliga, who was living in Kyiv during Nazi occupation and working underground to fight against them. Similar story of Tatiana Marcus, Ukrainian Jew who was also on the ground fighter with Nazis. A remarkable monument for Kyiv, a soccer team, Dynamo, that is, according to somewhat romanticized stories, had a match with Germans, after which they were executed, a cross to commemorate Ukrainian nationalists who were trying to fight Germans within occupied Kyiv, even a cross that in memory of prisoners of war, Germans, prisoners of war under Soviet Union regime. And finally, this monument is for the victim of that giant mudslide that happened in early 60s, and again was a secretive and nobody talking about kind of issue, and only now people can openly acknowledge it. So the bottom line here, that really there was a lot of attention, but not to downplay pain of anybody else, but there really was missing a central piece there, a memorial that really pays tribute to all of those massive killings that happens in 29th, 30th of September. All the Jewish people who were massacred, and basically the population, the Jewish population ceased to exist. The magnitude and the scope of that tragedy yet to be reflected in Babi Yar. So to finish it, I'm just going to say what is it now, because I do see some really positive advancements. So first one, before I even say that, this is a map of how Babi Yar area look right now. So you can see it is largely, it's basically flat, first of all. It's largely a park, and it's crossed in the middle with a major road. You can trace, you see the trace of the Babi Yar ravine itself. So just to situate you in within this map, this is the Soviet Union monument I talked about, and this is the gully where the mass execution of Jewish people took place. So I'm gonna relocate to this area, and I'm gonna show you what do we have there nowadays. Well, first of all, because the landscape was so changed and it's just so unrecognizable, you really need to put efforts to find where the things were happening. So what to help with that, they placed, I guess, the figures with binoculars through which you can look, and you can see how this landscape looked during the Nazis' invasion, during the massacre. So it actually gives you, I know, a vivid perception of how the place looked like. The second change that helps to bring to recognize the Jewish losses here is this remarkable open synagogue that was just built again in the vicinity of the double-edged hill overlooking the site of mass killing. And finally, the most significantly overlapping with the site of mass killing, in 2020, last year, a large circular mirror was built with 10 mirror columns in it. Each column, as you can see from this image, is bulleted, and apparently to create these holes, bullets of the same size was used, the same size that of the bullet that was used to shot the victims of Babi Yar. You can see the columns are ripped on top, again, further kind of emphasizing the atrocity of ripping all of the Jewish heritages and lineages of the city and just leave them broken forever. Another interesting and meaningful feature of the site that the speakers are installed all around it, and day and night, all the time, they call the names of each single victim of Babi Yar, followed by their age. And it's very shocking to hear that a lot of those victims are children, a lot of those victims are elderly. At night, the columns are highlighted from inside, creating a sorrow and yet spiritual look. And I do hope these columns, this view makes people to stop and give it a little bit of a deeper thought what happened there, because it is those thoughts that gonna prevent this from happening again.